Hello, my peeps. I am so excited today to share that I am the guest designer for Spiegelmom Scraps in November. And she sent me a whole bunch of sequin mixes and some of the shimmers. This one that I'm going to use today is called Trippy Tanzanite. And then you can see here I show you the shimmers is in orchid straw and the blings in pixie dust. And those are the ones I'm going to use on this layout about me. I don't usually do too much scrapping about myself, but maybe 1 or 2 pages a year. And this is about my adventures in purple hair. My design idea for this layout is to have messy circles. I cut some out of scraps of paper, and then I'm also going to be sewing a whole bunch of messy circles on the background directly. This is from Sulky. It is 12 weight thread and it is variegated. I've been dying to use this. I'm showing you here that I used the Silhouette sketch pen in silver to sketch 3 kind of messy circles. You could barely see it, but it was enough. The sketch pens are really old. It wasn't really showing up as silver, but it left an impression enough for me to tell. I had printed my photos twice, and I originally cut the ones that I didn't want to use, which had more of the background. These are the ones I've zoomed in more before I printed. And you know, I'm used to printing at home, and sometimes I print several versions of something to get it just as I want it. I give my daughters all the leftovers and they put them up on their walls. It's great. I got out some water and brushes. I'm pulling out the sequins to match things up, and then trying out the Orchestra Shimmers. It's very light, so I brought out the Distress Ink and Mill Lavender to give it a little bit more depth, just mixing it together with the shimmers. That still seemed light, so I got the Distress Oxide in Seedless Preserves, and I really like the depth that that gives it. And then to give it a little more contrast, I also grabbed the Shaded Lilac Distress Oxide, mixing in the Orchestra Shimmers with that. So I've got several shades of purple, and they all are shimmery now. Very briefly thought maybe I'd use the packaging technique, but the shades weren't different enough, so I settled for some splatters. To pick up on the aqua of my shirt in the photos, I pulled out the Distress Ink, not oxide, in Tumbled Glass and mixed it with the Pixie Dust Blings to give that some shimmer. Then I went straight for my background, which is a little nerve-wracking because I was worried about the brush strokes and not blending enough. I didn't put gesso on my paper because I don't really need to. All it required was just enough water to make sure everything blended and rather than leave it streaky. And I've got my shades of purple and some aqua. All of them are shimmery, just sort of in the middle there. I let that all dry off camera, and then I came back to stick down the circles. I only used 2 of the 3. The third one was small, and honestly, it was the first one I cut. It was thicker. It was not fitting my look. I'm using the scrapbook.com adhesive roller for this because it's a little smaller than my bigger one, and it's not a dot adhesive, but it works really great when I'm stitching. I've never had any problems with gumming up my needle. The outside was looking plain, so I just drew some lines around. I almost immediately regretted it, but I think it'll come together in the end. Off to my sewing machine. I always test before I stitch on my layout, so I had a similar weight cardstock, and then I started stitching around the paper circles first. I could still see the sketched lines barely, but it wasn't too hard to follow along, and to be honest, you kind of wing it sometimes, right? So I just made sure that they overlapped and were haphazard and messy so that you can't tell where I screwed up. But actually, you know, this is meant to be a messy, playful layout. First up is to do my title. I'm using an LE Studio little thickers. They're not this big thicker size. It's one of the few letter stickers that I have in purple, and I wanted purple hair to be in that color. I wasn't sure about the rest of the title, so you see me pull a few different choices, but I did find this a little alpha in, it's like a dusty aqua that matches the shirt perfectly. It still stands out against the background, which I'm happy about. It's so old, I'm not sure who made it. It might have been a Making Memories. I decided to divide up the title. So I'm going to be putting purple above, purple hair, and then the don't care below, and that matches the effect of the coloring from the photo top to bottom. Before finalizing the placement of the title, I decided to go ahead and start embellishing. I used primarily Coco Vanilla Studios Bohemian Dreams line. I used that flares from there, the chipboard, and the die cuts that I end up using. That helped me because I needed to know if I was going to overlap any into the center where the title was going to be. And I did decide to put one at the bottom where the don't care is. So, just shifting that over to the right spot so that they sort of nestle together. I did decide to add a little bit of adhesive to everything basically because of the mixed media background and the stitching. So in this case, just a little bit of roller adhesive to the puffy stickers. They did stick, but they weren't sticking great. I did check to see if the sticker sheet had any apostrophes. It doesn't, so I just went ahead and left it out. That heart was small for the space, so I want to bridge the gap between the corner of the photo and the outer ring. I went with a butterfly, although this isn't the one I'm going to stick with. And I'm rifling through all the die cuts, which are really, really cute. So what was my strategy in decorating this layout? Well, I went for wherever circles intersected, or at least most of them, and also the corners of the photos so that, they just didn't stick out. That white spot was calling attention, the corners. So the two corners at the bottom of the photos, and then intersections and the top right to balance everything around the circle. Journaling was going to be a bit tricky because I had quite a bit to say. And since they're not concentric circles, the lines overlap. I wasn't quite sure what to do. What I settled on was to number the sections, and I did test this on my daughter. I just handed it to her. She read it and she understood right away that, like section 1, you read both lines, top to bottom, left to right. I think it'll work out really well. Although this right here where I hand wrote, I am going to switch it up a little bit when I go to actually do the final journaling. Just to double check, I decided to put some more of the embellishments on because then I didn't want to have to end up having to work around the journaling. I'd rather work the journaling around the embellishments. I added the leaf sequins to each cluster. I like how they're smaller than the other elements in the cluster and they add that little bit of sparkle. And then when I was putting on the circular sequins, I realized that the white space on the left was going to bother me. I wanted the sequins on a stitching line just like on the right, and there was just too much of a gap. I know that there's a gap on the top right, but the gap on the left was worse. So here when I do my final journaling, I'm going to go around as I started at the beginning, but halfway I'm going to shift where the journaling goes so that on the left-hand side of the layout, it will follow the edge of the pattern paper circle, and that will fill in some of the blank space. Now, I did want white space in the design, so it's fine that the other side has a little bit of that in the middle. And this restores some more white space at the bottom because there was going to be too much writing down there. After I finished my journaling, I go off camera and erase all the pencil marks, and then I come back to it and add a little bit of splatters. Now, the last layout I made, which was on a white background and had quite a bit of white space, when I was splattering, it overshot where I wanted because I wanted to concentrate it. So this time I used a little scrap paper to block off the corners, the edges, because I wanted to concentrate everything towards the middle The splatters are meant to just add a little bit of texture to that plain white background, but I didn't want it detracting from the entire center. And then it's date time. My last layout, I put the wrong year on it. This time for sure, it was 2018 when I had this hairstyle done. I decided to go ahead and stamp it in the blank space on the right top, sort of like the journaling is, but I did do it in the background color. I used the Distress Ink Mild Lavender because I didn't want it to compete with the rest of the journaling. Here are the still photos. I hope you can get a sense of the shimmer. It's really hard to capture on camera and in the still photos. It was so much fun to play with the sequins and the shimmers. I'm looking forward to sharing more designs with you from my guest design spot for Spiegelmom Scraps through November. And here's a hint, it's gonna get a bit Christmassy. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you haven't subscribed, I hope that you'll consider doing so, and I will see you here next time.